Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming before us today. I want to go back to the question that Mr. Garneau was asking. He's focused on the difference between mandatory and voluntary. Of course, for something to be mandatory, there has to be some threat attached to it. Of course, back in the early 70s, the Liberal government of the day introduced the long form. They decided to force Canadians to answer the questions under threat of jail time or fines. And obviously, we've made a little bit of a different decision. I just want to ask, I guess, go right to the basis of this decision. What went into making this decision? What was the government thinking about as we made this decision?
Thank you for the question. Of course, as we ramp up closer and closer to another census, we know that the concerns of Canadians, not all Canadians, but some Canadians who felt that the long-form questions were too personal, too intrusive, those were going to bubble up again just as they do every census. And in fact, our tracking indicates that the number of complaints increases every census from Canadians. So that was what we were facing again for 2011. And again, we have heard the objections that Canadians be compelled by law to answer detailed questions. I've outlined them again. I can do so very briefly again about child support on question 53, or spousal support, dwelling repairs, detailed questions about income. When do you usually leave home to go to work? These kinds of questions are being asked. And we believe, we've come to the conclusion that it is not appropriate to threaten jail, threaten fines, to exact fines, or God forbid, actually someone takes it to the limit and is actually finds himself with a 3-month jail sentence for objecting to answer those personal questions. And that is why we sought different options. That's why we had this months-long dialogue with Statistics Canada to see whether we could have usable and reliable data that could be obtained at a reasonable cost for the purposes for which surveys are intended, while at the same time allowing those Canadians who object to this kind of personal information the ability to say no without sanction or penalty. And that was a decision that we made. And that's what we've been trying to do. And that's why we've upped the sample size to 4.5 million homes. It makes it the largest survey in the country's history. And that's a crucial difference between ourselves and the other side of the aisle in the House of Commons. We do not feel that Canadians should be forced on threat of jail or fines to provide this detailed information, or at least give them the option of declining to do so.
A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to host a few roundtables, 3 roundtables in my constituency. About 45 constituents overall came to these roundtables, and it was interesting. Despite all the media coverage, not one of those constituents actually brought up any opposition to this decision at all. But in my conversations that I've had with constituents, they've been very surprised actually when they understand, when they hear that there's a threat of jail time or fines for not answering questions like how many bedrooms do you have in your house, or how many hours do you spend doing yard work or housework, how much time basically do you spend with your kids was one of the questions in the 2006 census. And when I articulate to them that these are the types of questions that have been in the long form, and that if they refuse to tell the government how much time they spend with their kids, they can be threatened with jail time or fines, they're astounded by that. I think many Canadians don't really, they fill out the long form maybe if they're the 1 in 5 that get it, but they don't actually know that they're threatened with jail time for not filling out those questions. And they're surprised and quite agitated by the fact that we would actually threaten them with jail time for not, again, answering a question about how much housework you do or how much yard work you do. Now, I've heard our opponents on the other side, Liberals, go forward and actually, I think quite surprisingly, continue to press for prosecution for not answering these questions, or press for the threat of prosecution for not answering these questions. Is that the crux of this issue? Is that the defining difference between the parties?
Yes, it is. It's a combination of the intrusiveness of some of the questions that are being asked in the 40 pages of the long form, and the fact that if you object to some of those questions or wish to decline to answer those questions, the threat is fines and or jail time, up to 3 months in jail, and that is in fact used by census takers. I was speaking to a census taker, a former census taker, on the weekend, who indicated that they were instructed to use those threats of penalties quite a lot if they were encountering resistance from Canadians. So it is part of their repertoire to threaten the jail time, threaten the fines. For some people who may be new Canadians who have escaped from hideous regimes, they see this as a very real threat. And what this one census taker told me the story about how people were in tears. They were absolutely terrified of being deported if they didn't fill out the long form census. So there are instances of that fear, and I don't think government should be around for law-abiding Canadians to instill fear. I think that we should encourage people and use non-coercive methods if we want data from them, and that's simply our position, and maybe that's a great disagreement that we have with our friends in the opposition.
Thank you, Minister Clement.